So good afternoon. My name is Mark Akers, and I am the director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations here at Cal State San Bernardino. We serve children, parents, and families in the inland region through research, education, and applied services. I want to welcome you today to our webinar, Fostering Positive Sibling Relationships. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Caitlin Younger-Sackett. Caitlin is a master's in child development candidate here at Cal State San Bernardino with a focus on sibling relationships. She has extensive experience working with children as a teacher and researcher, and she has been a vital part of the ICDFR, serving as director or coordinator for several programs that serve children and families. We are so fortunate to have her here with us today, sharing some of her expertise. So please join me in welcoming Caitlin Younger-Sackett.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here. So we're going to be talking about fostering positive sibling relationships today. To get started, for those of you who are here already, I would like to do a little activity. If you could go to menti.com, MENTI.com, we're going to do a little word cloud. So when you're ready, you have the opportunity to enter a word or two. What comes to mind when you think about sibling relationships? I love it. We're already starting to see some answers here. So as this cloud builds, I'm noticing a lot of interesting words being used over and over again, emphasized in the bigger font there. Fighting, love, rivalry for a while was up there, fun. These are some of the things that we all think about when we think about our own childhood, when we think about what we want for our children and their relationships with their siblings. And we know that as parents, a lot of these things are very challenging. The arguing, the fighting, how annoying they can be to each other, but also how incredible that bond can be. The love, the fun they have together, the happiness. So I'll leave that up for just another moment in case anybody else wants to submit anything, and we'll continue on. So you can definitely see that we have a lot in common there with the things that come to mind when we're thinking about sibling relationships. In our short webinar today, we're going to be covering for why sibling relationships matter. We're going to talk about that parent-child relationship and how that affects the sibling relationship. We're going to talk about sibling conflict and rivalry. And we're going to talk about some other influences on sibling relationships and what you can do. So why do sibling relationships matter? Well, for those who have them, siblings can have a great impact on social skills, emotional regulation, overall well-being, life satisfaction. And the more successful the sibling relationship, so the more positive that relationship is, close and supportive, the better the individual's outcomes. Throughout life and into old age, siblings can be a source of companionship, a buffer against stress, and a source of comfort and a link to the past. So what can we do to foster positive sibling relationships between our children? Well, it starts with us. It starts with our relationship to each of our children. If you have a negative relationship with your child that's characterized by yelling, shaming, belittling, overall not meeting their needs, your children's relationship with each other is likely to also be characterized by negativity and conflict. However, if you're fostering a secure attachment bond with each of your children, they're likely to also develop that positive relationship with each other. An individual's attachment security, so that first relationship with their early caregiver, serves as a model to them for all of their future relationships, including their sibling relationships. And this association between your relationship with your child and their relationship with their sibling begins even before the sibling arrives. Again, a lot of this comes down to how secure your child's attachment to you is. Did you know siblings spend around 50% of their free time together? And with so much time spent together, conflict is bound to happen. But this actually creates a really wonderful opportunity for siblings to practice their social skills with each other. Sibling conflict is typical and it's frequent. Any parent is going to be able to tell you that. On average, kids have about 5 fights every day with their siblings. And younger children sometimes have up to 8 conflicts an hour. Minor conflict, though, between siblings doesn't mean that they have a bad relationship with each other. Think back to the poll that we saw. A lot of you were saying that you experience conflict with your siblings, but also experienced a lot of positivity with your siblings. And that's true. Sibling relationships can be high in both conflict and positivity. As a parent, though, you just want to watch out for that escalating conflict and escalating negativity. But of course, even though we know it's going to happen, all of this conflict does present a frustrating challenge for parents. So what causes it? Well, children are born with a drive to survive. They're wired to compete for resources. While they may not be physically competing for food like a pack of wild wolf cubs, they still have an instinct to make sure they're getting adequate time and attention from their parents. And access to stimulating experiences and so on. And if children feel like they're receiving unfair treatment or resources, they can become jealous, feeling like the sibling is a rival instead of an ally. Differential treatment from parents can look like many things. It could be showing favoritism, allocating chores differently, being more or less likely to discipline one child over the other, even treating the younger child differently at a specific age than you treated the older child at the same age. And yes, they'll remember. Even if you don't think you're treating your children differently, they probably feel like you are. But children sometimes need to be treated differently, right? I mean, younger children just need more from their parents in general. Well, if the children perceive the treatment to be fair, even if it's different, it's less likely to negatively affect their sibling relationship. And how you can help is by making it a common practice to talk to your children about the needs and feelings of their sibling, while of course also validating that child's needs and feelings as well. So the good news, studies show that while parents judge the quality of their children's relationships based on the frequency of bickering and squabbling, children's evaluation of their own sibling relationship is less influenced by this. They tend to rate the quality of their sibling relationships higher than their parents do. But back to what causes it. Aggression tends to be more frequent between young children and more frequent when the children are closer in age. So an age gap of about 3 years or fewer. You're going to see more conflict and more aggression. Aggression tends to be a little less frequent between siblings of opposite genders, but girls can be just as aggressive as boys can. Thankfully, conflict tends to naturally decrease in frequency as children grow up. So what can we do? Well, prevention is an important step. Although conflicts will occur at times, there are some things you can do to set your children up for success. First, be mindful of triggers, such as differential treatment. Explain to your children why their siblings might need different things than them. Might need more attention, more help with their homework, etc. And try and think ahead when planning. Acknowledge to yourself if you might be subconsciously playing favorites with your children or with one child over another, so that you can actively work to meet all of your children's individual needs. Remember, you are the world to each of your children, and they need to feel like they are valued and special to you. So once we become aware that a conflict is occurring, you have to decide how you're going to respond, right? So you could ignore the situation, kind of cover your ears, put your head in the sand, let them figure it out on their own, tell them to go ask their other parent to handle it, or just pretend it's not happening. You could sanction the conflict and encourage further conflict. So hit him back, show him how it feels, bite her back. You could punish the siblings, take away the toy, send them to their rooms, yell at them. But this takes away that opportunity for learning. And keep in mind that without even realizing it, parents tend to favor during a conflict, they tend to favor the child with less perceived power. And that's typically going to be the younger child. And this can feel like differential treatment to the children and lead to jealousy, ultimately increasing the conflict. Not what you're looking for, right? Or you can go in as a coach and help the children learn conflict resolution skills. Studies have shown that when parents facilitate sibling conflicts, children are more likely to use de-escalating moves during future conflicts and are less likely to use physical or verbal power, crying, or other oppositional tactics during future conflicts. But how? How do we do this? Let's bring in our coach. First step is check your emotions. So you've seen that a conflict is starting to happen and you're going to step in. Stay calm. If we're riled up, it's only going to make things worse. Then you want to connect and empathize with both of the children. Next, help describe the problem with the children. Use your active listening skills. State each child's side and state it without judgment. At this point, you want to help children express their feelings without attacking the other sibling. Then you're going to move on to problem solving. And this is where the real coaching comes in. First, ask if they have any solutions. See if they can come up with a list of things. See if each one can agree to something that the other has suggested. And if they're getting nowhere, start to make some appropriate suggestions if it's needed. You may need to restate some family rules at this point. Let's see what that might look like. So when you're setting up family rules, it's best if you include your children in helping to write these. These should be decided on ahead of time, revised as needed, reinforced often, and you can use family meetings to discuss these. Some examples of family rules might be kind even when you're mad, clean up after yourself, ask permission before using something that isn't yours, no hurting, use inside voices in the house, knock on closed doors before entering, always be honest. Whatever your rules are, make sure they're rules that work for your family and make sure that you can follow them as well. You want to be consistent with those. Finally, you want to confirm a solution with the children before you walk away from them. Make sure that they've both agreed on it and they both feel like it's acceptable. And you might need to keep your ear open and follow up with some more coaching before conflict reoccurs. So let's go back to the idea of ignoring conflicts. Ignoring all conflict can lead to bullying and more severe aggression. However, becoming involved in every little conflict, so becoming intrusive and controlling, may actually prolong the conflict and escalate it to physical aggression. Use facilitation to teach conflict resolution skills, but then give your children some space to use them. You don't have to jump in for every minor conflict. Just be ready to step in with more coaching and more facilitation if the conflict escalates, or if you're noticing that they're not able to come up with a solution on their own. This is especially important with adolescents and teenagers. If you're being intrusive and controlling in their relationship with their sibling, it's going to affect them even more than it affects younger children. So we're going to decide whether or not to step in. And we've decided we do need to step in. We need to take action and do some facilitation. When you're setting limits for your children, make sure you're doing so empathetically. So let's see a couple of examples. Here's an example of setting a limit while acknowledging the child's feelings and needs. So rather than saying, "Don't shout at the baby, you're making her cry more," try instead, "I understand that the baby's crying is so loud, it hurts your ears. It hurts mine too. Shouting at her isn't okay though. It scares her and it makes her cry even more." Let's see another example. This one redirects the child's impulse. Rather than, "You bully, that's it, time out for you," try saying, "You're mad and I won't let you hit your brother. Can you tell him in words how mad you are and what you need from him? Here's an example where you give a child a choice. So rather than shouting, "That's dangerous, give me that stick," try, "Austin, do you hear Lewis? He's saying that he doesn't want that stick so near his face. You can either put the stick down or come with me over here to swing it where it's away from your brother." So with all of these examples, we take what could actually escalate the conflict with our own negativity and we turn it into a teachable moment. We use empathy and we validate both children's feelings and experience. Remember, most acting out behaviors, including conflicts with siblings, are symptoms of an underlying need that hasn't yet been met. And it's our job as parents to figure out what that need is. Are they getting tired and grouchy? Are they getting hungry? Or is it something emotional? Are they feeling sad about something? It's your job to figure out what that underlying need is. So to recap, here are some things to keep in mind. First, decide if the intervention is necessary. Listen to each child without judgment and help them listen to each other. Discuss with your children the feelings and needs of their sibling. Encourage them to come up with a mutually acceptable solution. And finally, notice when your children are using acceptable interactions and go ahead and point that out for them. Give them some praise for that. And then finally, as we move toward wrapping up our webinar, let's talk about a few other influences on sibling relationship quality and what you can do about it. Your own well-being, stress, depression, anxiety, your own well-being impacts your children's relationships with their siblings. Parenting is a hard job. We do so much to make sure that we're meeting our children's needs. Make sure that you're taking some time to meet your own needs as well. So take a moment to think about some things that you can do for yourself to de-stress and take care of yourselves. Could be going for a walk, could be taking a moment to meditate. It could be just closing your eyes and taking a deep breath. Whatever works for you, whether it's a momentary thing or something that takes a little bit longer, make sure that you're allowing yourself the time and space for that. Your children's sibling relationships are also impacted by your partner relationship. Children of divorced parents tend to have less positive relationships with their siblings than children of married siblings. Than children of married parents. But what it really comes down to is the level of conflict and negativity between the parents, whether they're married or divorced, together or separated. So it's important to keep that relationship healthy, whether you're married, whether you're co-parenting with a partner that you're no longer with, whether you have a new partner. Make sure that you're being a model for your children with that positive relationship. Finally, spend quality time with your children and have fun together. Siblings whose parents spend more time with them together tend to have better relationships with each other. Fun experiences help strengthen that sibling relationship. So go ahead, go for a hike with them, build a fort with them, have a family game night. And if board games lead to more conflict than fun, reassess and try something that everyone does enjoy rather than trying to force it.
Wonderful. That's great. Caitlin, thank you so much for all that you shared. And, I appreciate too how, towards the end, you sort of talked about both how we as adults, as well as in our adult relationships as parents or caregivers, can influence, what that means for children and their relationships with their siblings as well, right? Because I know, I as a father of two boys, that's one of the things I struggle with, right? When I'm out of energy, out of gas, stressed, whatever, that affects my ability to be patient, to be thoughtful, to kind of do the things that you talked about. So I appreciate you bringing that in as well.
Absolutely.
We do have a number of questions, Caitlin, and I would remind folks who are watching, if you have questions for Caitlin, please put them in the chat and I'll add them to the queue and we'll get to as many questions as we can. But again, I do want to start off the questions by just saying thank you, Caitlin. There was so much valuable information in what you shared today. Okay, so one of the questions that came up when you were talking about, as a parent, sort of evaluating when jumping in versus not jumping in, and helping kind of resolve conflict. And the question was, you mentioned not always jumping in, and I struggle with this. So how do I evaluate? How do I know when, as a parent, I should step in versus to let the process kind of work out between the siblings?
Yeah, I would love to spend more time talking about this. There is no one overall answer that's going to work for everybody. A lot of it has to do with how well you know your children. With minor conflicts with older children, usually the suggestion is just to kind of stay out of it, unless you see that it's starting to turn physical. With younger children, under 2 years old, you want to always be right there with them when they're interacting so that you can physically intervene if somebody goes to grab the other's hair or grab the other's toy, so that you can be ready to facilitate. But around 2 years old, right, they're learning autonomy. They want to start practicing how to be independent. And so that's when, by then, hopefully, you've facilitated and shown them some of those conflict resolution skills. They're starting to use words now. You can give them some of those words to use, like, tell her I wasn't done with that. Say, can I have it back? And you always want to make sure, of course, that you're close enough to step in. But the more mature your children become and the more practiced they become with using those techniques, the more you can kind of leave it to them. So overall, if it's minor and nobody's getting hurt, it's not escalating, you can kind of listen in and maybe just leave it to them. But if you see that they're not able to come up with a solution, it's escalating, they're starting to hurt each other physically, that's when you want to start stepping in.
That's great. And it's important too. I hear you saying kind of to understand that standard is different depending on their age, right? And that they're capable of more of that resolution as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. One of the questions that was asked, and I think this one came before the presentation, so some of this you would have spoken to already, but the participant asks, I have daughters age 9 and 10. Do you have advice or techniques for helping them have positive conversations with each other?
Yeah, so they're really close in age, and we know when they're closer in age and when they are the same gender as each other, the frequency of that conflict is going to go up. So you have your hands full with them, but that's okay. The best thing that we can do is model for them. So if we want them to have appropriate conversations with each other, we need to be able to model having appropriate conversations with them. Remember, it starts with our relationship to each of our children. And then from there, you can try doing things like having them write down lists. If they're having trouble communicating with each other, sometimes taking a step back and having each one of them make a list of things that are annoying them or, disturbing them about the sibling, whatever they're having a conflict about, and doing that neutrally in different spots, and then coming back together when everybody's feeling a little bit more calm to address those things in a non-judgmental and open way, is one way to start that conversation going between them.
That's great. There's a question, I didn't realize it was related until I heard your answer, but you mentioned the idea of the closeness in age, right? Which clearly brings some interesting dynamics. Another person had asked, do you have suggestions for how to deal with sibling rivalry when the age gap is large, right? So for those situations where there's kind of a big age gap between children.
Yeah, so One of the reasons that conflict tends to be so high when the age gap is smaller is because they're spending more of their time together. And when that age gap is larger, the time spent together and of course the mutual activities decreases, but their role toward each other is going to change a little bit. When there's a really large age gap, the older child tends to internalize more of a caregiving role for the child. And we want to both foster that. Again, I can't stress enough how much it comes down to our relationship with each of our children. If we are fostering that secure attachment with our children, they're going to be taking that internalized model and reflecting it back on others around them. So if you have a secure attachment with your oldest child and you've modeled that gentle interaction, empathetic, validating their feelings, they're more likely to use that with their younger sibling. And you can also encourage that by pointing it out when it happens. Make sure that you are having those conversations especially with your older child, about why your time may be more diverted to the younger child. That you can remind them, when you were this small, I had to give you this much attention too. And I know it's going to feel a little bit different. It's a change for all of us. Tell me what you need right now, and we'll see if we can spend some one-on-one time together later.
Hey, Caitlin, is part of the challenge, I mean, do we expect more of the older sibling? Is that part of it? Like, our expectations are different?
I think so, yeah. When it's just our first child, that's all we have to focus on. But of course, when a new sibling comes along, everything changes, and we do expect a little bit more out of our older children. But remember too, how fair is that?
Right.
They also have needs. Their needs don't go away just because a new little one came along.
Right. Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. I shouldn't say this out loud. That's probably one I need to remember in my own. Excellent. I appreciate that. Okay. This is a little bit of a more specific one. So someone writes in that they have a daughter and a son that are 4 years apart. One is 8. The daughter is 8. The son is 12. And the perception from the parents' lens is that the siblings fight about everything, like where are we going to sit, who's going to sit where for dinner, or who gets to shower first, and that these kinds of tensions just tend to kind of result in conflict, and sort of how typical is that, and maybe it's their ages, maybe it's one's adult, one's a boy, one's a girl, but I think some thoughts maybe on how typical that is.
Sure, that's incredibly typical. It's also influenced though by how much we're encouraging competition in general. We should take a look at ourselves and see if there is anything that we're doing specifically to encourage that competition and kind of pit them against each other. One thing that I would suggest trying out with these boys is have them make a list of rules for themselves. When children contribute to making their own set of parameters, they're much more likely to fall within them. So if it's that each one of them wants a special spot on the couch, have them talk it out, and they come up with a schedule on their own. And then if there's any conflict about it, you just remind them, well, if something needs to change, agree on together changing your rules. You're the ones that set them.
It's interesting. One of the things that strikes me when as people likely know, I've heard you talk about things like this before. And so, and one of the things when I hear you speak on these issues is that in part, some of the things seem very straightforward, right? Like they're right. That's what I should do. And that makes sense. And that's not hard. But it is hard, right? It's not easy. And so, one of the questions that came up that I think fits that is, the person says, I understand your guidance, right? I understand what you're saying, but do you have advice on, as a parent, how to have the patience to get through some of these processes that you're describing?
Yeah, well, patience comes from within us, right? I think that One thing that you can remember as a parent is that you don't always need to sweat the small stuff. When it comes to the minor bickering, just kind of remove yourself from it. If it is just minor, you don't have to get yourself all worked up. Give yourself the space to recognize that you're not going to be perfect, and that's absolutely okay. And I find whenever I remind myself when I'm working with kids, like, okay, this doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to do the best I can to turn this into a teachable moment. It gives me a little bit more patience.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I could see too how the better we become at sort of choosing our moments, right? Picking the right spots when we really do need to be involved, then the easier it becomes to have patience, because it's not draining you all the time.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's great. We have a question from a sort of a professional in the audience as an MFT or MFT training, I guess. Do you have advice for how they might teach parents or advise parents who are struggling with sibling conflicts? And they note during the pandemic, I imagine that there's probably some carryover between how to do that generally as well as during the pandemic.
Yeah. When working with parents, I would say a really important thing, and it has to start here, is with their own well-being. And I'm going to assume if you're an MFT and you're working with parents, hopefully they're getting that, and that's where it's starting for them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We can't give to our children what we don't have in ourselves to give, right? We can't regulate children's emotions if we're not able to regulate our own emotions. There are a couple of actually really wonderful books that are easy reads for parents. One of them, got it here. Yeah.
Here, pretend this is spontaneous, right? Just happen to have it right behind you. Yeah.
Siblings Without Rivalry. It's by Adele Faber and Elaine Mazlish. This is one of my favorite go-tos when it comes to sibling relationships, and they have some really neat cartoons that lay out examples of what you can do with your children. So find a couple of good books, good videos, good YouTube videos maybe, and start sharing those with the families that you're working with.
Excellent. That's great. And I'll just a note for those who are in the audience, any references that Caitlin mentions, we'll make sure they're included with the video when the video is published, and you'll get a clear link to whatever those might be. Okay, we have one last question, and it has to do with a parent asks, how my children are always arguing with each other. And so, I know a lot of what you talked about kind of spoke to this in different ways, but do you have any recommendation maybe for where do they start? Right. So for parent of siblings who are just constantly arguing, where do they start to help those children have a better relationship?
Yeah. I would suggest being really honest with them. It's okay as parents for us to approach our children and say, listen, it doesn't look like this is working for us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm frustrated by it. I think you guys are frustrated by it. And sit down and have a real discussion with them, especially if they're older children and have those verbal skills. Ask them what they need, and help them verbalize what they need from each other. Obviously something is going on between you that is making it really difficult. What is it that is making you want to lash out at your sibling? Share that with your sibling and share with each other so that you can both recognize that things can be worked on, and then gently support them from there.
Mm-hmm. It's fair to say, I think, and I really mean this as a question, but that it takes time, right? That we're starting from a place, and that honesty and that open conversation is the first part of what will take time.
Absolutely. And successful sibling relationships can be both conflictual and positive.
Right.
Just because there's conflict between siblings doesn't mean that they can't have also a great bond with each other. Again, it's the more aggression and the more severe conflict that needs to be addressed.
That's great. What a really important point to end on, right? This like pursuit of perfection is not where it's at, right? That there will still be, challenges and conflict, and that can be okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much. You shared so much, useful, interesting, helpful information. I know that, as a parent, I got a lot out of it, and I'm confident that those of us who are watching did as well.
I hope so.
Yeah, without question. So my sincere thanks to our speaker, Caitlin Younger-Sackett, and of course, my thanks to all of you who joined us today and participated in our webinar hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at California State University, San Bernardino. To hear more from us, please like and follow the ICDFR on Facebook and Instagram. Visit our YouTube page where all of our webinars from the past, including where this one, are available. And you can also learn more about some of our projects and activities by visiting the ICDFR webpage on the CSUSB site, which is csusb.edu/ICDFR. So with that, again, my thanks to Caitlin and my thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful day and be well.